Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fifth session of the South and Southeast Asia Climate and Health Responder course. My name is Tasya, and I will be your moderator on this week's session on climate extremes, agriculture, food, and water security. This course have three objectives. The first objective is to enhance the knowledge, confidence, and communication abilities of current and future health professionals concerning the climate crisis to improve population care and public health practice and serve as credible advocates within their institutions, communities, and professional domains. The second objective is to equip interested current health professionals with the knowledge and skills needed to educate their institution's own learners so that health effects of climate change and emergency preparedness can be incorporated more easily into pre and post licensure training across the globe. And finally, the objective is to build and strengthen an agile and informed community around climate and health education, advocacy, and policy for health professionals with strong mentorship and expert support. This is an 11-week course, and this week we are already on our fifth session on climate extremes, agriculture, and food and water security. If you missed the past sessions, feel free to watch the recording on our YouTube channel. For this week's session, the learning objectives are 1. To describe how extremes of temperature, droughts, and precipitation are affecting food security and nutrition in South and Southeast Asia. Second, to explore mechanism for forecasting food insecurity using climate models. Third, to examine strategies to enhance food security in the context of a changing climate, focusing on sustainable practices that increase agricultural resilience. Additionally, to evaluate the associated risks, such as the potential for increased reliance on agrochemical and the expansion of farmland through deforestation and their implications for environmental health and human well-being. 4. To explain how climate change affects all our dimensions of food security, availability, stability, access, and utilization. And finally, the objective is to describe the relationship between agriculture, which includes food, animal, and plant, and greenhouse gases emissions, and the core benefits of improved diets for mitigating climate change and addressing malnutrition. Before we begin, here are some logistics of the course. This course is a 90-minute session course, which includes expert lectures and case study presentations. The sessions will culminate with a question and answer section. Please enter your questions for the presenters in the Q&A box, not in the comment box. Sessions video recordings, slide decks, and resources will be made available on the course website. We will also periodically send the link through the chats. For attendance, it will be automatically recorded during the live Zoom session. To have your attendance be counted, you have to join using your personal Zoom link. Your attendance is not counted if you join using a colleague link or only watch the YouTube views. Additionally, for certificate of participation, it will be given to participants who attend at least 7 out of 11 Zoom sessions and pass the final exam with a score of more than 70% at the end of the course. They will be awarded with a certificate of participation in climate and health from the GCCHE. The certificate of participation is only available to people who use the same email registration for registration, all Zoom sessions, and the exam. For the final exam, the exam must be completed using the same email address used to attend the Zoom sessions. The exam link will be sent on the final day of class via email and WhatsApp and will close on the Sunday of the week. The format will be around 25 multiple choice and true and false questions, and participants should be prepared to take the exam in one sitting. So today we have two distinguished presenters. The first presenter is Professor Dr. Punya Prasad Regmi, which is a senior research specialist on agricultural economics at the Nepal Development Research Institute. Professor Punya is a distinguished academic and policy expert with an extensive career in agricultural economics, education, and national development. With over 30 years of teaching and research at Tribhuvan University, Nepal, Professor Regmi has supervised numerous doctoral candidates and master students, published more than 60 literatures, and lead over 35 national and international projects. On the policy front, Professor Regmi played a significant role in Nepal's public policy and economic development. particularly related to nutrition and food security. Beyond Nepal, he also had various appointments at international university in Japan and Switzerland. Our second speaker on the case study will be Catherine Jones, which is currently a disaster resilience officer for the Asia Pacific at Food and Agricultural Organization or FAO. Catherine Jones is a climate and resilience specialist from New Zealand with over 12 years of experience across climate change, food security, and livelihood sectors in both humanitarian and development contexts. She currently works with the FAO, focusing on disaster resilience across the Asia Pacific region. Her work spans early warning systems, anticipatory action, climate change adaptation, loss and damage, social protection, and emergency response and rehabilitation. She is committed to advancing systems that are locally led, socially inclusive, and equitable. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Professor Regmi to start with a lecture on the topic.
So, good evening from Nepal. Um, Welcome to fellow participants and all the audience in this session, lecture session 5, Climate Extremes, Agriculture, Food and Water Security. Thank you introducing me and for the background information to Tasya. You all know that agriculture is the life supporting system. So without agriculture, we cannot imagine the human existence. So it's a very important sector. And this agriculture sector is very important in terms of food security and nutrition security for the human health and prosperity. And for agriculture, water security is also very important. So water management for agriculture is the key sectors in terms of irrigation and in terms of other uses of waters. So that's why I know this particular topic is very much interested to the audience. Although we have seen a lot of progress in agriculture sector, so a lot of the production has been increased with the increased population, but still at the cost of some environment, at the cost of some ecological services. So agricultural productions have been made in recent days. So I think the climate change has enormous impact on agriculture. We have observed a lot of climate extremes in terms of flood, in terms of drought, in terms of heat and cold waves, in terms of storms, in terms of landslides. So a lot of the climate extremes we have been observing, we have been experiencing, and these climate extremes have a lot of impacts on agriculture. So I do not want to repeat because until the 4 sessions, participants might have already gone through what is climate change, what is global warming, how it is affecting the human health and other activities. So I think the one of the crucial area to be addressed is the agriculture sector, agriculture, food security, and water security in terms of climate change. So this particular topic is very much important for all of us. As I said, the agriculture, without agriculture, we cannot imagine our existence. So who suffers the most from the climate change? You all know that Also, there have been a lot of literatures. So particularly the climate change threatens to reverse the hard-earned development gains. The poorest countries and communities will suffer the earliest and the most. So it is true, the poor economy countries, marginal communities, poor people, particularly who are residing in the mountains, which is high risk of climate change, and also in the sea level areas where the sea rise is also affecting a lot of floods in the downstream, a lot of landscape and landslides in the hills and mountains we have been experiencing. So that's why the poor or the lower income peoples or countries, they are affected the most. The world's 2.5 billion small-scale farmers, herders, fishers, and forest-dependent people who derive their food and income from renewable natural resources are most at risk and affected. Agricultural resources, particularly land, that is natural resource, forest. Also, without forest, we cannot grow livestock, or we cannot, think about the integrated agriculture. So that's why the land, forest, water, these are the precious natural resources which have been affected by the climate change. And that's why this particular lecture is very much important from the perspective of agriculture, food security, water security, in not only in one country, so all over the world. So since this this lecture is all about the climate extremes in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So as I said, the most vulnerable or most affected, the people are the low income people residing in the low income countries, lower middle income countries. So you find in South Asia, there are 8 countries. Out of 8, Afghanistan belongs to the low income countries, and Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, they belong to lower middle income countries, and Maldives belongs to upper middle income countries. So these countries, you will see that these lower income and lower middle incomes are high hit by climate change. And even Maldives, the sea level rising has created a lot of pressure to the people of Maldives, to Maldives country. And in Southeast Asia, many countries are under lower middle income. As you know, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, People's Democratic Republic, Myanmar, Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. So these countries are lower middle income categories. And Malaysia and Thailand are upper middle income countries, and high income countries are Brunei and Singapore. So you see, as I mentioned earlier, the low income countries, particularly lower middle income countries and low income countries, are threatened, particularly poor people. So these are they are facing a lot of problems because the as you know, agriculture in these countries, the main occupation of these lower middle income and low income countries is the agriculture, and agriculture is threatened by climate change. So therefore, these people or these countries are suffering the most. As you see in the global picture, countries by development stage. So in this South Asia, most of the countries are under least developed category and emerging or developing country category. Only in Southeast Asia, they are developing countries, emerging developing countries, and 2 countries are high income categories, Brunei and Singapore. So you see, these least developed countries are mostly, doing the agriculture as the main occupation, and this is hard hit by the climate change. Similarly, you see there is a link between the low income and lower human development index by countries, as you see in this global map. So countries of South Asia and lower middle income of Southeast Asia have a lower development index, where you can see more difficulty, or they have less capacity to adopt the climate change resilient practices. Therefore, these indicators are also very important in terms of policy making, in terms of planning, and in terms of designing climate resilient development activities. So in terms of food and water security, so first, I think you all know what is food security and what is water security. There are many definitions you can find in the literatures, but essence is the same. As I quote, the definition given by the World Food Summit in 1996, food security is defined when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets dietary needs and preferences and helps to fuel an active and healthy life. So you have to link this definition with the ground reality of the people of South Asia and Southeast Asia, particularly residing in the rural areas doing agricultural practices. So are they getting the food all times they need? And is the food there is available, accessible, and that they utilize as per the need, or are these foods are stable? Stability is there or not? So sustainable food production is very important, for which sustainable agriculture is needed. Similarly, regarding the water security, the UN Water, the publication in 2023 to 2013, I take this definition and put and I decode it. The capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socioeconomic development, for ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. There are a lot of wars, conflicts for the availability of water, for accessibility of water, for utilization of water also. Therefore, water is also life. So without water, we cannot imagine agriculture. We cannot imagine life as well. So this is also one of the precious natural resource to be conserved, to be utilized in the sustainable manner. So that's why these food and water security, the sectors are very much important for the people, for all countries of the world. So as you see in this this slide, the spatial and temporal, the global hunger index scores. As you know, according to Sustainable Development Goals, by 2030, so almost all UN member countries have agreed to to achieve the zero hunger by 2030, right? So Sustainable Development Goal 2, Sustainable Development 6, Goal 6, 14, these all are related to the hunger, climate change actions, also water, the security. So there are, the already, the global sustainable development goals are set, but now it seems difficult to achieve these sustainable development goals, particularly by the African and South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, also Latin American, Caribbean countries. Only the global North countries have the capacity to I think they sustain for many things. But these poor countries, it's difficult to meet the sustainable goals by 2030. So, although they have set the target, country targets also, they have some strategies, some, the initiatives they have taken, but results are not so, the encouraging. So that's why these South and Southeast Asian countries, where agriculture is very important, particularly, the rice is the main crop for many, the South Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. So it's a stable crop of this region, and this needs a lot of water. So rice needs water, because without water we cannot cultivate rice. So if water security is, the threatened, if water is, the in difficult situation, then ultimately rice production will also in great threat. So that's why not only rice, all the agricultural crops, all the agricultural, the activity sectors like even livestock, fisheries. So even all other sectors also related to agriculture are in great threat because of this climate. I think the change in South and Southeast Asia. So South and Southeast Asia home for more than 33% of the global population. So you see, it means, so agriculture production, particularly self-sufficiency in agriculture, is greatly threatened because of this climate change. And South Asia accounts for nearly 40% of the global total, with 281 million undernourished people. So that's why the hunger, undernourishment, stunting, wasting, a lot of, the malnourished, these things are found in South Asia and Southeast Asia. That's why I think these countries are more, the vulnerable to climate change, which is serious one. So we need to take, the some special steps to, the adapt climate change in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So there should be resilient agricultural practices and development activities. So South Asia is not on track to meet any of the sustainable development goals by 2030. So this is also another, the indication that we need to have some, the more efforts for, the meeting the sustainable development goals in South Asia. Even Southeast Asian countries, that despite their economic growth, affordability of healthy diet lags behind the global average. So in order to, go above the average, so Southeast Asian countries have also need to, they put more efforts in climate resilient agriculture, in climate resilient food systems, food and water security systems. So that's why we need to, they look at each country of, the South Asia and Southeast Asia in terms of agriculture, food, water security in South Asia. More or less, the climate change effects are faced by all those countries, but some countries are more, the vulnerable to, for instance, landslides. Maybe for some countries are more vulnerable to floods. Some countries, almost all countries, are now, the vulnerable to droughts. So droughts have, the heat effects and the cold effects have, the enormous impact in agriculture in almost all countries. Just I will pick some example of this country, like Afghanistan. Agricultural drought is threatening the food security and livelihood of millions of Afghans, particularly in the country's northern, northwestern, and central provinces. If you see the Bangladesh, every year, 3 to 4 million hectares of lands are affected by droughts of different magnitudes, negatively impacting agriculture, food, and water security. In Bhutan, so glaciers are shrinking. So this is another, the impact of climate change, particularly in the mountain countries. So snow lines are shifting. The snow, the white snow are, they're vanishing, and the glaciers are shrinking, and less snow is falling, and less water affecting agriculture and water energy. Particularly, this is the case in Bhutan. In India, so India is a big country. So somewhere it is affected by floods, somewhere it's droughts, somewhere they're affected by other climate hazards. Lot of the heat waves and cold waves, sometimes storms, sometimes other climate related the hazards. Like in drought affecting 26% of its land area with 9% extreme drought critical situation in Karnataka. This is the recent past event in India. In Maldives, the existence of the Maldives is severely threatened by sea level rise. By 2050, 80% of the country could become uninhabitable due to global warming. This is one, I think the future prediction. So the Maldives has to, put a lot of efforts to save the country from this, the sea level rising effect because of the climate change. And in Nepal, in recent years, there has been a trend of prolonged winters without precipitation. So we are, since I am also from Nepal, we are facing a lot of unusual, the climate, unusual weather, unusual precipitation, impacting production, agricultural production. The country is home to more than 1,000 disaster potential glacier lakes. Now, so since these lakes sometimes, they burst and affect downstream, and flooding is also a problem. So since fragile mountains in Nepal, there are a lot of landslides every year, a lot of damage, the erosion, soil erosion, and also a lot of, the contributed lands are turned into desertification. So that's why in the mountainous country, Nepal also facing a lot of, the climate change effects. Pakistan, the winter of 2024-25 has been one of the driest in Pakistan's history. Since Sindh has been the hardest hit by this winter drought, receiving 90% less rainfall than normal so far, while Punjab, the country's most agriculturally productive province, has recorded 69% less precipitation. So this is alarming. So Pakistan also, the greatly threatened by climate change. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's dry zone, covering 70% of the country, faces severe water scarcity and land degradation, threatening agricultural ecosystem and livelihood. So that's why, these South Asian countries, just I picked some of the, the small examples. So there are so many, the cases of, the adversely affected climate change effects. Similarly, in Southeast Asian countries, you see a lot of climate extremes in terms of drought, floods, heat and cold waves affecting agriculture security and water security. In Cambodia, for example, agriculture is extremely vulnerable to increased temperatures, changes in rainfall patterns, extreme weathers, cyclones, drought, flooding, sea level rise in coastal areas, so and so forth. Indonesia, throughout 2023 and 2024, the nation experienced 6,827 climate-related disasters, affecting over 13 million people. This is a huge loss because of this, the climate change effect. And Lao PTR, more than 80% of the area is mountainous in Lao PTR and highly susceptible to climate change, particularly to flood, drought, landslides, and storm conditions causing food and water insecurity. In Myanmar, highly vulnerable to natural hazards, including floods, cyclones, earthquakes, droughts, landslides, and tsunamis, impacting agriculture, food, and water security in a higher scale. Philippines, as you know, El Nino phenomena impacting over 900,000 families, or 3.7 million people, about 5,000 villages, and affecting agriculture, food, and water shortages. Similarly, Timor-Leste, agriculture is affected by erratic rainfall, tropical storms, cyclones, intensified by El Nino and La Nina. So one is heat, another is a cold, sea level temperature is affecting a lot in Timor-Leste. Permanent bodies, water bodies are scarce, and agriculture areas are at risk of drought. In Vietnam, rice production could decrease by, there is a prediction that rice production could decrease by 8.3% in 2040 and 9.6% in 2050 compared to peak levels. This is the prediction of World Bank. So Malaysia expected to reduce rice yield by up to 31% within the next decade, reduce the country's capacity to maintain rice self-sufficiency above 65%. In Thailand, climate extremes such as droughts, heat waves, unpredictable rainfall patterns, storms, floods, and an increase in insect pests affected farmers' livelihood. So these are only some in the points which are affecting food and water security in South and Southeast Asian countries. So I just, they give some example of, the water food nexus evidence from Nepal. You can see this, the graph where this is a paddy production, the line, paddy yield line, and this is the, the monsoon rainfall. So if the rainfall decreases, the rice yield also decreases. If rainfall increases, and rice yield also increases. So there is a positive correlation between the rainfall and rice production. So this means, if rainfall does not occur, if a drought is there, then in that season, rice yield is drastically reduced. So that's why, the climate has enormous impact in production. This is only one example in Nepal. So I just show you. So Nepal has 3 ecological zones. You see this whole area is plain, down plain, and in the mid hills, and up here is the mountains. We have plain, hills, and mountains. So we have 3 ecological zones. And nowadays, so temperature is rising, and also erratic rainfalls are occurring. Sometimes, the droughts, a lot of effects, and we can see these red points. You see this landslide. Frequently occurs in the rainy, particularly in the rainy seasons, and the landslides. Even in the dry season, so the slides are there. So the floodings, landslides, the droughts, they are affecting a lot. And you can see in this map, so this area within the circle, you can see these are barren area, because earlier people used to cultivate this land because of, the migration, youth migration. That is another, the problem, mainly because of, the climate change. People are migrating to better, the places, better job opportunity places. So rural youth means the source of labor, agricultural labor. So that's why the shortage of labor has enormous impact on agriculture. Now, the earlier, the cultivated lands are now converted into barren lands. That's why the agriculture sector is threatened. So this is another, the thing. So climate change, we can see a lot of impacts on agricultural food security in Nepal. I give a little bit details of Nepal, so that I think many things are similar in other countries also. Climate change is expected to influence food consumption patterns in Nepal, to disruption to internal agriculture systems and volatility in global supply chains. So degradation of agricultural land and the progressive conversion of such land to non-agricultural regions further compromise the sector, because some of the fertile lands are now being used for other purposes, residential uses. So these are also affecting agriculture as well as climate change. And epidemics of pests and disease are also on the rise, increasing crop management challenges and raising production costs. Affect agriculture indirectly by impacting the health and productivity of the labor force. Global labor productivity during peak months already declined by 10% due to warming. So this is also very important aspects. And the women play a pivotal role in Nepal's agricultural sectors, often fulfilling critical activities such as crop cultivation, kitchen gardening, livestock rearing, and forest resource management. With 87% of the country's migrant workers being male, there has been a shift towards feminization in agriculture. So if we look at the gender in agriculture, we find the mostly agricultural activities are done by women, because male laborers have already migrated in search of the jobs or the extra income. As seasonal laborers, as abroad, they go to abroad. So, however, women farmers face distinct vulnerabilities due to limited access to land, water seed, agricultural training, and credit resources are more accessible to men. Currently, only 10% of farms are owned by women, are jointly owned by men and women. So, the existing trend contributes to the heightened exposure of female-headed households to climate shocks. As you see, agricultural house accounts for more than the 60% of household in Nepal. So agriculture is the highly affected by climate change. This means most of the households, most of the Nepalese are affected by the agricultural food security and climate risk. Rice yields decline under some scenarios, while yields many improve warming is highly areas. So temperature sometimes is good for rice yield in highlands, but most of the rice is grown in the lowlands. So as we say, the grain, the balls of Nepal is the plain. So where the temperatures is affecting a lot. And maize production has already been negatively affected by increasing summer maximum temperatures, and further stress is anticipated as the frequency of extremely hot days. So nowadays, you see hot days are increasing per year. So that is also affecting. So here we can see some of the studies done by NDRI, the climate change impacts on floods, impacts of floods on rural households and agriculture. We see, and there are the prediction, in 50 years from now, there will be more, the floods. So that's why, this is alarming to agricultural activities and agricultural households in Nepal. So if you look at the climate change vulnerability and multiple hazards in South Asia, this map shows that in most of the part of India here, and also in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and also you see in Bangladesh area. So I think in Nepal also the vulnerability is higher. I think the high risk of climate change, most part of the these countries. Bhutan is relatively in the low risk because they have very good the biodiversity conservation practices. So I think you see the blue the areas in the extreme risk. These areas are under extreme risk in Southeast Asia. So I think which have enormous impact in agriculture, food security, and water security. Similarly, you can see in the climate hazard map of Southeast Asia, you see the higher the risk in the dense intensified the red colors. So you see in Philippines, even in Cambodia, you see Vietnam, and also Laos, this part, and then many, even the Thailand, this part, and also a lot of, these Indonesian and Timor-Leste. So these all are, the seen that there is a high risk. So this gives, there is a, the hazards, climate hazards in this Southeast Asia even. So climate, from the climate vulnerability, climate change vulnerability point of view, you can see, and these countries are, the highly vulnerable. So it needs to be, the put more efforts in climate resilient initiatives, climate resilient development activities, climate resilient agricultural practices in these, the South and Southeast Asian countries. So these are also, this is the vulnerable map. You see the highly vulnerable, the areas of Southeast areas are seen in this, and also moderately vulnerables, and you can find here in this map. So therefore, we need to, adopt climate resilient agriculture strategy for food and water security in South Asia and Southeast Asia and beyond. For instance, we have to, we have to consider health, food, and water security, right? Similar livelihood of the people and community, ecosystems and ecosystem services we have to maintain well, and infrastructure and built environment should be environmentally sustainable, resilient transportation, energy water systems, and climate smart urbanization or modernization. So similarly, you see here, climate smart agriculture, community-based disaster risk reduction, the glacier lake outburst and floods, and also this one is the dam outburst of floods, lake dam outburst of floods, which is very common in mountain the areas of South Asia and Southeast Asian countries. So climate change challenges are there in terms of public health, water supply and sanitation and irrigation. So community-based adaptation and ecosystem services, ecosystem-based adaptations are required in order to, achieve sustainable agriculture in South Asia and Southeast Asian countries. So before concluding, since I belong to Nepal Development Research Institute, so this Nepal Development Research Institute was started in 2004. So I am one of the founding members and past president of this institution. We have four, the thematic areas, doing research and policy influencing activities related to livelihood and food security, water and climate security, health, education and environment, economic development, and cross-cutting fields are gender equality and social inclusion, as well as disaster management as the cross-cutting themes. So I think somehow our institution is working a lot of research related to this today's lecture. And thank you very much. So this picture is from the mountain the agricultural land. This is the millet of the one of the neglected crops, and these indigenous crops, neglected crops, are in also great threat because of the climate change. So snow line is shifting. So a lot of the temperate crops, temperate fruit, temperate livestock, temperate the habitats, they are in great threat. So with this, what I want to conclude is the agriculture is most important the sector for our life, for our the existence, and for our food security and nutrition security. And I think the attention should be given more and more. More efforts have to do for achieving the sustainable development goals, achieving the resilient agriculture development activities. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, to Professor Regmi, for the engaging lecture highlighting the interlinkage between agriculture and food and water security, but also the importance of context and how different countries and communities face different hazards and impacts, especially on their agricultural production and capacity. We will now move on to Catherine Jones for the case study. Catherine, the floor is yours, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to upload my presentation now. So if you give me just a couple of seconds, it should be up in a minute. There we go. So hopefully everyone can see that now. Let me know if not, and I will try to refresh. But hi everyone. Thanks for the introduction, colleagues, as well. Just to remind everyone, my name is Catherine Jones. I work on disaster resilience for the FAO regional office out of Bangkok. So I'm covering Asia Pacific, so all the way from Iran to Samoa in the Pacific Islands. And today I'm going to be presenting about anticipatory action, which is one of the ways that we're looking at combating disaster risks throughout the Asia Pacific region, basically harnessing early warnings to mitigate climate risks on food security and livelihoods. So I'll take you on a bit of a walk through what this all means and going through some practical examples at the same time. Now, to kick us off, I just wanted us to recap a little bit on 2024. We had El Nino, a strong, moderate El Nino come into play within the region. And what we saw is some of the basically compounding disaster risks that were happening throughout the region. So from Southeast Asia, we had Typhoon Yagi that caused devastation across the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, PDR, Myanmar. It was one of the only 4 Category 5 storms that have ever been recorded in the East Sea and the strongest in 30 years. We saw massive impacts to agriculture throughout that region, but this was also coupled with drought periods that were happening in Southeast Asia as well in the end of 2023 and early 2024, and that also impacted Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea, as well as Cambodia as well, were part of this list. Then in Mongolia, we had the worst Zud. So if some of you are not familiar with Zud, it's a severe winter season where it can have a really devastating impact on livestock. And what we saw is that over 8 million livestock in the country perished because of the severe winter season that happened over 2024, early 2025. And that happened where the 12.5% of the country's livestock were basically all gone. So really a devastating year when it came to a range of natural hazards. And last but not least is South Asia, where we saw in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bangladesh a range of flooding that happened across the region. Flash floods and also kind of riverine floods really dominated the space in 2024, and over 7 million people were affected in Bangladesh alone because of these conditions. So what we're basically seeing, and what I'm trying to make the point here, is that natural hazards are becoming more frequent, more intense, they're impacting impacting more people, but at the forefront of this is the agricultural sector. As we've seen in damage and loss data across all of these different events that have occurred, it's either agriculture, crops, livestock, or fisheries that are at the forefront of those numbers. So how can we better support them as we're starting to see the climate risks starting to get more and more compounding, and people are not only facing one natural hazard, they're facing multiple natural hazards at one point. So we need to think creatively, we need to think innovatively, we need to find solutions. So today I'm going to talk about one solution. It's not the silver bullet. I don't think one solution ever is, but it's one that's being explored by a lot of people working on disaster resilience these days to figure out how can we better support farmers, fisherfolk who are at the forefront of these risks that we are facing today. So what trends are we seeing? So across the region, we are basically seeing more frequent and intense droughts and floods, which are disrupting the crop cycles and damaging critical water infrastructure as well. And we've heard a lot about this from the previous lecture too, so I'll be very quick on the slide. But also with El Nino and La Nina, what we're also witnessing, particularly in that Southeast Asia zone, is the shifting of monsoon patterns. So it's either becoming too early, too late, below average, and it's just making everything a little bit more unpredictable. We used to be using El Nino and La Nina to be able to better predict these hazards that we're seeing, but now we're finding it's a little bit off tilt. What we've been able to use in the past is becoming more difficult to understand what these patterns are and how to predict them. In coastal and delta regions, we're seeing saltwater intrusion also becoming a problem. This is particularly centralized with drought and with heat waves that are also becoming an issue that we're seeing across the region. And this can have a dramatic drop in crop productivity. We actually saw this last year in Cà Mau province in Vietnam, where saltwater intrusion started to become such a problem that the government started doing water trucking to support communities because of the saltwater intrusion. As mentioned, rising temperature and heat waves are exacerbating a lot of evapotranspiration and reducing labor productivity, which is really important. We have a lot of labor that supports agricultural systems as well to get on the table for a lot of people and for themselves as well as a working wage. But if we have heat waves increasing and making conditions harder for people to work in these environments, this is a big worry that we're also watching. In the highland areas, we have accelerated glacier melts, which is altering river flows as well. And we've already got in some countries some really, I think, extensive and experience around early warning systems when it comes to floods. But when you have these melting glaciers as well, it can disrupt what we've been putting in place and the patterns that we've been seeing. And it does have a long-term threat to irrigation, for instance. In Afghanistan, a lot of the snowpack and the glaciers feed into the irrigation systems into the spring season. So really interesting to see that correlation coming through, and also that connection to hydropower. In Pakistan, that's really important, where we've seen droughts happen across Pakistan in the past. We've seen that impact hydropower outcomes too. And these are trends that are well documented by the IPCC, ourselves at FAO and other regional bodies, but we are looking at all of these patterns and systems, and what we're starting to see is we need to look at ways that allow us to adapt and mitigate to this. Now, there needs to be long-term solutions. That's at the forefront what we need to push, but there's also opportunities that we can support people who are going to be on the forefront of these risks no matter what, and for us to be rapidly able to support them. We're also working very closely with the ASEAN Meteorological Service to see about particularly ENSO patterns and agricultural trends. We see that there's not a lot of information out there between the two, and it's a big gap of knowledge at the minute. So seeing how La Nina and El Nino in the past have related to maybe even yield productions, and seeing that trend analysis come through. And that's the biggest gap that we're seeing, particularly in the region, and we're hoping to also expand that to other areas. Now, getting into one of the solutions, again, not the silver bullet, but we're seeing it to be a very positive contribution to the disaster risk management landscape. I want to just double check with everyone here. And I know there's a lot of us here, and it's been so exciting to see people from all over the world joining the conversation. hoping we have a few in the chat box that you can tell me if you've heard of anticipatory action before. And to kind of understand if you've engaged with this approach, I've got a quick question for you. Regarding anticipatory action, where do you think it would sit on this continuum? What color would it be? So this is your typical kind of development, disaster risk management, linear approach. And we know it all doesn't work like that. Nothing's linear in this world. But what we can do is here we've got, for instance, long-term development is green. Seasonal preparedness is yellow. We have orange, which is kind of that moving into the red, the shock going to happen. Purple is response, and then blue is recovery. If you were to guess where this concept of anticipatory action would sit, what color would it be? So write in the chat what you think it would land on, and we'll see if people are getting close. And I'll open up the chat now so I can have a look at the answers. Oh, I see yellow. I see green. Oh, wow. I see a lot purple, light green, yellow. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Some very good answers in here. Now, do you know what? Oh, I see one that's got it right. Fazil Haris Homadhata. I see that you've got it right. It's orange. And Christina, I saw that you got it right too. So anticipatory action is in the orange zone. So seasonal preparedness is very important and part of disaster risk management. So this is, for instance, if you know over a season you've got a high risk of flooding or you've got a high risk of typhoons, maybe because El Nino or La Nina in play. But we all know that La Nina and El Nino don't equal these events happening. It's not a guarantee. What anticipatory action is doing is we're looking at early warning systems and looking at them really intently to understand if the risk could come to fruition, not but if, and how we can act on it with bigger confidence. So instead of waiting for maybe saying over that season, we'll see if we've got an above average monsoon, for instance, we're saying we're looking specifically at a riverine system in Bangladesh. We've got systems throughout for us to be able to measure and have a certain trigger where we know of a certain probability, up to 90%, that the flood is going to happen in, say, 5 days' time. This allows us to protect lives and livelihoods with a greater confidence and put funding next to this as well, and allow people to have that early warning in hand of a flood happening and have that bigger trust as well that they know that this potential event could come to fruition. So it's between seasonal preparedness and between a shock. But what's really important to know is that anticipatory action happens before the shock occurs. Now, getting into kind of a more definition-based approach. So here we've got kind of a very simple way to kind of think of anticipatory action. And so it's a set of actions taken before a disaster, as I was mentioning previously, and based on warnings to reduce its impact on people, infrastructure, and assets. So it's really important to think about it in kind of a three-tiered process or 3 building blocks, which I presented here. So these building blocks were actually developed by ASEAN. So the ASEAN framework on anticipatory action and disaster management highlights these 3 areas for us. So the first being those triggers and alerts that I was speaking about before. So having something for a flood or a cyclone 3 to 5 days prior to be able to know with confidence that it is going to make landfall or the flood is going to come to fruition. So we can put more resources down to help people move or evacuate livestock or harvest their crops earlier as well, or secure down their agricultural infrastructure to keep it safe prior to this. Or for a drought, for instance, we've got a 2 to 3 month warning with confidence to be able to support the drought-resistant seeds, irrigation systems, agricultural drought practices through trainings as well with farmers. So there's all these options that we can do based on these triggers and alerts. This is also one of the most complex areas where we do rely heavily on government meteorologists to come in and support this area. So they need to develop these triggers. And we work very closely with them at the moment to set those thresholds and that when we know when those alert alarms need to go off. One of my favorite ways to describe a trigger is a smoke alarm. So if you've got a smoke alarm in your house and you start to have a fire and the smoke starts to come up and the alarm goes off, you can usually go and put out that fire before it burns your whole house down. That's essentially what a a trigger is trying to do. So instead of having maybe a house with a fire with no smoke alarm and it all burns down, what we're aiming to do is act in that way, having that early warning and that trigger when we know a fire could turn into a huge hazard. So that's a metaphor I like to use to help kind of wrap our head around that one. Then what we have is once that trigger goes off and we have that alert, we connect that to pre-agreed targeting and operations. So this is where we like to harness social protection systems through governments to know who is the most vulnerable through risk, exposure, vulnerability information. So this is something that is developing, of course, but understanding where the most at-risk farmers and fisher folk are so we can deploy as quickly as possible to help them. And then we have the operations, so the different activities that we can do to support. And currently there's a wide range of different actions that you can do for certain risks to support communities ahead of a shock. Governments today that we've been working with are really fond of livestock evacuation protocols. Recently in the Philippines, we did the evacuation of fishing boats as well, but also multi-purpose cash has been seen as a really good initiative for households, but also paired with Plus, as we like to call it, where they receive agricultural support such as hermetic bags to store their crops or cuttings to support the next season, or equipment to also keep trees or orchids, you know, the big plantations of maybe coffee trees or coconut trees all secured for the cyclones and before they come through. Then linked to this as well, and what's really important is flexible financing and timely financing. So this allows us, if we know 3 to 5 days prior to a shock something's going to happen, we have that financing tied to it. So governments can look at having some contingency funding agreed, and it's usually a small amount at the moment, and it's a growing area we're trying to see. So for instance, in Mongolia, they had usually for response fodder and hay reserves that were sitting ready to go if they had a disaster, Zoot disaster happen. So then if people were struggling to get their livestock alive, they would then deploy the fodder and hay to the most vulnerable herders. But what we saw last year when we were doing the Zoot anticipatory action, they released that fodder and hay ahead of time to be able to keep animals alive at the prior to the peak of the Zoot. So this kept them healthy throughout, kept animals who were then pregnant as well healthy, and then allowed us to have more milk production after the Zoot as well. So it's really important to see how we can use government financing, but also agency financing. So you've got agencies such as FAO and other agencies such as OCHA and other colleagues like Start Network who are also looking into this as well and connecting it to financing. So this is where we have our own internal funds to support governments or communities to be able to implement anticipatory action too. But what's key here is that it can be released in a few days. So that requires a little bit of planning beforehand. Now, what hazards can be talked about with anticipatory action? I find this an interesting one because I've been in some conversations where people have asked, oh, but can we do this for earthquakes? Now, being from New Zealand, I'm very used to earthquakes. And I was in Southeast Asia for the recent earthquake there too. And it's something that you just can't predict. You can maybe have long-term calculations that allow you to have a probability that's of low confidence, but it doesn't give you a 3, 4, 5 day outlook of a higher probability to 90% that you know it's going to happen at that certain time, on that certain day, at that certain point. So what we're looking for anticipatory action is that early warning. And what we currently have in the Asia Pacific region is really strong systems that are going over typhoons or cyclones, riverine flooding, drought, volcanic eruptions. Zoot, as I was mentioning, is that severe winter season, and heat waves. We've been able to successfully predict these 6. People are very interested as well to look into landslides, livestock diseases, human diseases, forest fires, conflict and displacement. Conflict and displacement have ethical issues as well that we're still, as a community, figuring out if we do manage to find ways to predict them. What does that entail? Oh, sorry, I went a bit early there. Let me just try back. And human diseases and livestock diseases are one that we're starting to associate more and more with climate and these kind of pests diseases coming to fruition. So we're starting to explore more and more there what is possible with the prediction and the lead times that we could possibly get. Now, what does it currently look like in the Asia Pacific region? So this approach has been growing, massively growing, and I've been working on it for about 6 years now, and I've seen it go from pace to pace. In the Asia Pacific region, there's 130 anticipatory action systems being established, but these are primarily for floods, typhoons, droughts, and cold waves, heat waves, and diseases such as malaria in the region as well. So being able to predict those elements. They're mainly conducted by agencies, so the UN, NGOs, and community-based kind of organizations. But we are seeing more and more uptake from governments. And the evidence base for this approach has been growing. I think one of the key elements that I always appreciate is that communities who we've been speaking to really advocate for this type of approach and prefer this type of assistance to response. Now, response is important, recovery is important, and it does not replace that, and it does not replace preparedness. Preparedness is also critical to go through. But what anticipatory action does is reinforce preparedness and these response capacities, but allows us to act prior to the hazard. So as a farmer or a fisher folk, you get rapid support in a short period of time to protect what matters the most to you. So your livestock, your crops, ensuring that after the shock, you can resume your livelihood instead of having to wait to rebuild or recoup what you've needed or lost. So it's been really, I think, interesting to speak to the communities. Over 9 countries last year, we did anticipatory action from the Philippines to Papua New Guinea, Timor, through now to Afghanistan. And through and through, communities have come back and said, this is the type of assistance that we need. I want to have hope that I can protect what I have rather than lose it, rely on aid and having to start again. So it really builds up that momentum and protection element that we've been looking for. But alongside that community element, we have seen that it's cost effective. And that's what I also see that governments and donors are really interested in knowing. And what we've seen is that for every $1 invested in anticipatory action can have a return of up to $7 in avoided losses and added benefits. So yeah, it's one that communities love, but fiscally also makes a lot of sense. And this evidence base is growing and one that the community is also trying to foster more and more as well. So why invest in anticipatory action? I just wanted to take this case study from the Philippines really quickly as well, where ahead of Typhoon Mani last year that happened to hit Catanduanes, so this is in the northern part of the Philippines, we managed to support 6,000 fisherfolk through community cash grants to keep their fishing boats protected and enable them to evacuate them to the shore or being able to support their repairs afterwards. So only a small group managed to receive the cash in time prior to the shock. But what we found is that they went back fishing almost immediately. So after you had the typhoon come through, after the settlement had settled in the water, and it was clear for them to go back fishing, they were able to because their boats were protected, intact, not damaged. And if there was some damage, it was easily fixable. So they were able to get back on the water ASAP. Those who received support after maybe 1 or 2 days, 3 days, they were only able to get back onto the water 1 month post-shock due to more extensive damage that they've had on their boat. So it took them more time to get the resources, get everything in order prior to those who received it before and managed to get everything in place prior to the shock. And those who received no support were waiting up to 5 months. And when I was speaking to some of the community members there, they were still not out on their boats fishing. They had to keep them away because they were too damaged and they were looking for work on other fishing boats to be able to keep their families afloat. So it's really important that this shows them how going closer to the shock and being able to provide support prior is really important, and it gets people back onto their livelihoods and keeps them intact as well. So I think this is a really powerful story that came from the Philippines. But in a nutshell, I just wanted to reiterate this one point, is that anticipatory action provides an option to offset damage and losses and equip farmers to protect their livelihoods in the wake of increasing climate fragility. So as I was presenting, I was trying to highlight how the disasters are getting more intense, they're getting more frequent. We have all these investments now going into early warning systems. Some of you might be connected to the early warning for all conversation, maybe, or you might have heard of it. And this is something, particularly in the climate environment, we're trying to harness a bit more and seeing how we can improve early warning systems, particularly those triggers. And we're seeing all these investments go into this to see how we can move our support to not just be in the response realm and waiting to pick the pieces up, but seeing how we can support communities to pick the pieces up or protect what they need to do prior to the hazard, and keeping everything protected and mitigated. So that's what we're aiming to achieve. So off to a case study that I wanted to say, because it's one thing to think about this theoretically, and I know sometimes anticipatory action can be a hard concept to get sometimes the head around on how it differs from preparedness or how it differs from response. So I wanted to kind of go into a deep dive about Bangladesh and the monsoon flooding, where we did anticipatory action. So as some of you, and I think we have some people here from Bangladesh in this course, so hi, and I hope I'm representing your country the best I possibly can, but there's been some great work that's been happening in Bangladesh around flood anticipatory action. And we know it's one of the most flood-prone countries in the world, and there's over 80% of the land is classified as floodplain. So a big risk for a lot of farmers and fisher folk as well that rely on their livelihoods, and they're used to also floods. This is something that is no stranger to a lot of people in Bangladesh, but one that we are, because of climate change, starting to see more and more issues emerge. So people's capability to cope with these extreme events that maybe happened one every 5 to 10 years are now happening to one every 2, every 3 years. So their ability to bounce back from these particular episodes is becoming stripped away. Climate change is also intensifying monsoon rainfall and glacier melt in upstream regions, which is also making flash floods more of a risk as well. And we saw in the 2022 floods, over 7 million people were submerged in entire communities with vast croplands just completely washed away. So we've been seeing these massive numbers come out from Bangladesh as well, and a really core need to be able to do more premeditated mitigative action. And more intense and erratic floods are likely to impact 15 to 80% more land area by 50. So this is a risk that is here to stay and here to intensify, sadly. Oh, we're going the wrong way. Sorry, guys. There we go. So when it comes to anticipatory action in Bangladesh, we have established a range of triggers with the Meteorological Service and with the government, who are monitoring the systems really, really closely. And they are based on hydrological forecasts and rainfall thresholds and flood depth models. And this is generated by both national and regional early warning systems. So for instance, we use what we call GLOFLAS, which is a global and regional tool that allows us to predict with a high probability, around 80%, if a flood is going to come to fruition in a certain area, and Bangladesh is included here, within a 10-day period. Now, we can't use that solely because it is still a bit of a probability lower scale. So governments are also not keen to act on that also without local knowledge being fed in. But this allows us to understand, hey, okay, we're starting to see increased rainfall, we're starting to see the levels of the river also intensify, and this kind of triggers us to then move into that national level monitoring period, where the National Met Services then monitor very closely the rain gauges, and if they reach their alert and threat level, this then is connected to anticipatory action, and the actions then move accordingly out into the communities. So with the 7 to 15 day forecast that we receive, so on 15 days we might receive the GLOW+, the global warning saying, hey, get on your mark, like for a race. And then for the 7 days, we would receive the national forecast where they say, please go and support communities and get ready to get out there and move livestock and do preemptive actions such as rapid cash transfers, early harvesting advisories. Waterproof drums have been proven to be really useful to a lot of communities alongside hermetic bags, as I mentioned before, to keep grains and goods, particularly agricultural goods, high and dry during these periods, and also fodder as well, keeping that also dry for animals and emergency livestock relocation. The objective of this approach is to keep animals alive and pre-harvest crops if in the growing stages to keep livelihoods maintained post-shock. So just quickly, I know I've been talking a lot, but I've got a short video I would like to show you, which I think encapsulates a lot better than what I can say about the Bangladesh experience. And you can see for yourself how the approach is being implemented on the ground. So I'll play the video. Hopefully the sound comes through. Someone do ping me if not, but I'll play it now. That is the last of my presentation. I just want to leave you as well, just to think about with anticipatory action, it is about saving livelihoods, but when we save livelihoods, we also protect food security and the health of many people who rely on the livelihoods not only for their income, but to put food on their tables. So when we look towards solutions to keep those livelihoods moving, keep them protected as climate risks become more frequent and intense, I think we're looking down some really great solutions, such as anticipatory action, to ensure that they can keep their livelihoods intact and food security moving forward. So yeah, I just wanted to leave you on that note as well, but I'll pass it back over to Tasya for the next steps. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, for the presentation. It's very engaging, and I know this is like a very new topic for everyone because like we have a lot of questions asking you for more details. But before we get to that, I will start with the question for Professor Regmi. There are a lot of questions on like what would be the next steps are to increase like agricultural resilience. Maybe like you can talk more about like based on your experience in Nepal or internationally, what are like some steps that's like some countries already done? Maybe like developing or like using like climate resilient variety of existing crops or like dealing with other issues such as fertilizers, or is there any like specific technologies or initiative or adaptation or mitigation strategies that could address the climate change effect on agriculture?
Okay, thank you for asking the very good questions regarding the resilient agriculture development and related to adaptation and mitigation activities. I think the source of the climate extremes, climate hazards, is mainly the fossil fuels, use of fossil fuels, which is non-renewable energy. So we need to they give more priority on renewable energy, particularly in the countries like Nepal. We have a lot of the water resources. We can use the hydroelectric powers instead of using diesel or the gasolines. So now we are also doing in this line as well. So there are a lot of the development activities are going on. For instance, the uh, earlier there were no roads in the hills and mountains. Now haphazardly roads are constructed without the keeping much attention on the conserving soils, conserving the using the bio engineering techniques or other things. So these have been realized, and now while the doing some infrastructure development or the other development activities, so climate the protection, environmental protections are being considered one of the major things. I think the green and clean the concepts are very important in agriculture. So inorganic fertilizers are used mainly, although there is a scope of the using organic fertilizers, producing organic fertilizers. So there are been shift. I give you an example. We have in Nepal 7 provinces, and one of the provinces, Karnali, the provinces has declared organic agriculture province. So now it's challenging. It's challenging. It's very the not so easy to the shift from inorganic to organic one. But the government has taken the lead. Government has already the decided. The government policy has already there. So that has been instrumental to the conserve our the biodiversity, the conserve environment. So a lot of insecticide, pesticide, inorganic fertilizers have been trying to reduce in this, the province. So similarly, the other also now, the earlier using inorganic farming systems, now trying to go for organic natural farming systems. So climate resilient, climate environmental friendly, the initiatives have been they started, and in some the already the damage we have seen, for which the appropriate mitigation strategy, appropriate the adaptation, like that we have drought. Now agricultural scientists are producing drought resistant varieties. That has been the very, very useful. So, the research, innovations, in order to, the green and clean energy, green and clean or climate resilient agriculture has been, the very much, the drawn attention of scientists, of policymakers. I think this is a global phenomena and complex phenomena. So I think we have to have the integrated approach, united approach to the protect our precious planet. So without passport, the pollution travels from one area to another area. So I think we all, being a global citizen, we have to protect our globe by giving more priorities in resilient development, climate resilient development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Regmi. That was a very comprehensive answer. Now, similarly to Catherine, there's like a lot of questions asking for more details on like the anticipatory action. So I'm just gonna like summarize the questions based on your experience. There's like a lot of questions like if you can share more resource, where can they read more about this, how they can do this if they want to implement it in their own communities. But also like based on your experience, because like climate change definitely changed the climate pattern. So like how do you like work with the prediction model like the seasonality is changing, the length of droughts and everything are changing. And then like about funding, like right now, there's like on the international, national global level, of course, like countries work with others to provide the funding, but like on the local community level, like who they might work with, and then like how they can better collaborate within countries in Asia Pacific. And then finally, like when we talk about climate change, of course, we need to talk about like climate refugees. So like how do you work with communities that require resettlement and how have you been able to address the challenge working with them?
Love all these questions. Very great questions as well. So thanks everyone for your enthusiasm around anticipatory action. I know it was just like a kind of a bit of a snapshot into it. So I'll definitely provide you with a lot of resources. So I also co-lead the Asia Pacific Technical Working Group on Anticipatory Action, and we have a range of different sources you can use. We have technical guidelines, we have a training manual, we have a simulation toolkit that'll be coming out soon. So I'll make sure to share with all of the organizers a list of different tools that you can access, and these tools are developed with over 30 organizations and 100 participants. So everyone agrees, and there's a formal process that we go through. So it's a widely endorsed tools that you can implement, and likely maybe some people in your country have already been using them as well. But I'll make sure to share those. I'll also share some government-based initiatives like the ASEAN Framework on Anticipatory Action and Disaster Management. I think that's a really key piece because it comes from a government voice. So I supported ASEAN with the development of that particular piece, and it's been really great to see governments really take that up. And I'm actually here, I'm not in Bangkok at the moment. I'm speaking to you from Geneva. I'm at the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction here, where we're looking with the different intergovernmental bodies as well to push out the boat a little bit and explore a cooperation on anticipatory action to help build some more materials as well and support national governments in the uptake of this approach, because it's one thing for an agency to do it, it's another thing for a government to do it with very tight resources and also compounding risks and overloaded agendas. So we're trying our best to make sure that we can streamline moving forward. Now, with the climate vulnerability question, that's an excellent one. We are seeing increasing extremes come through. And I also saw in some of the questions as well, there's compounding vulnerability that's also increasing. Like in Indonesia, you've got deforestation that also compounds these climate extremes that we've been seeing. Mongolia was the same, where you have an increase over the past 10 years, a 40% increase of the amount of livestock, and that impacts land. So how we're going about this is in two ways. Is one, that vulnerability, risk, and exposure mapping needs to be updated on a regular basis. So we are looking at kind of virtual models that we can use and support governments with overlaying this different information that then feeds into the early warning systems and enables us to kind of make those decisions based on maybe even a lower threshold. So maybe, for instance, you've got a category 2 cyclone coming, but it's going to an area that has been highly deforested. So you've got to take that into your decision making. So that's where we build these protocols to match that vulnerability information alongside the early warning information. But connected to this as well is some really interesting, I promise not to talk too long, I'll try my best to summarize this quickly, is AI. So I know a lot of people are a little bit wary about AI. I was too at the beginning, but then I could see how machine learning can be really helpful for this, because it allows us to feed all this different information in and can help us really correlate big data sets. So we tried this out in Papua New Guinea, Laos, and Timor-Leste, particularly in some areas like Papua New Guinea, for instance, where you do have gaps in, for instance, rainfall data that comes through. We need to make more decisions. We can train an AI model to take in consideration the vulnerability data, but also train it where we might be skipping some of the months with rainfall information so we can keep a correlation going. That gets a bit complex, but I'm happy to talk more about that as well if there's of interest from the group and share some information there. Funding, yes, it's a very interesting funding environment at the moment as well that I think many of us are experiencing, but also at the national level as well with those competing priorities, and at a community level, you've also got various kind of disaster risk management planning. With the community level, I know, for instance, in Vietnam, we've been working through community-based disaster risk management systems and the policies and the, what do we call it, the protocols that are being established at that level. Now, anticipatory action, whilst financing, albeit small, is can be really supportive. You can also look at no cost or low cost actions. And I saw one question in the chat as well, was cash the only, the best option there? I've written 2 papers on cash anticipatory action, and what we would say is cash plus is the best option. But then I would also argue that if you have a government, for instance, that needs to support a huge population, not all of them can do cash interventions. So we do need to also look at opportunities where we can do low or no cost interventions, like livestock evacuations. It doesn't cost that much. It's just training and getting people to understand where are the best places to put your livestock. How do you also organize your livestock? So you don't have everyone going to the same area, losing your animals or spreading pests and diseases at that certain time as well. So I think it's a mixture that we're trying to look at. So one is that local financing that can come through, but 2, also seeing what we could do that doesn't involve financing. And yeah, I think that's a really an important one to see, but then also looking with governments how contingency financing can be geared towards anticipatory action, but looking at solutions that enable them to not have to do something that they can't cover large swathes of the population, because that's one of the biggest issues we're seeing with anticipatory action at the moment. Agencies are doing it like ourselves, and we maybe target 10,000 people, but a government's like, I can't just target a small group of my population. I need to cover all of my people. So seeing how we can work through that as well. Again, complicated, but happy to discuss more. And then finally, on the climate refugees and resettlement question. Yes, this is something that we've been working with. So we recently released a paper on a methodology on how we can do anticipatory action in these contexts. So again, I'll make sure to share that paper as well. But we had in Mindanao in the Philippines, we had a drought anticipatory action system activated in 1819, I remember. And it was during the height of the Mindanao conflict as well. And what we saw is with some of the communities, they got then taken to the evacuation centers who we needed support, and they were at risk of losing their whole entire rice crop. And usually when that happens in Mindanao, and again, colleagues from the Philippines, I hope I'm doing you proud with this, they often then take on a second job, or they take out a loan, and not been able to protect what their key assets. But what we did is we shifted agricultural production to the evacuation sites, which is still close to their house, but enable them to have kind of a secondary planting spot to be able to keep producing vegetables, for instance, over that period, where women in particular then went to the market and would sell the vegetables and make extra money. And as the crop sadly was disintegrating because of not only the drought, but the farmers couldn't tend to it, and it does need extra attention when you have those kind of drier conditions. So it's very much still a learning opportunity there, but one that is definitely growing. But yeah, I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I know there was a lot, so I just immediately summarize and ask everything to you. But since we're at time, I just want to wrap the session up. Apologies for going a little bit over time, but it was truly an engaging session. And me and the speakers and also the organizing team are really appreciating your interaction and enthusiasm for our session today. Please don't forget to fill the feedback survey, which we already sent on the chats, and we will also resend it on the WhatsApp group. And if you haven't joined, please also feel free to scan the QR code to join our WhatsApp group. Again, thank you for your participation for this session, and we look forward to see you in our next session.
Thank you. Thank you very much.